All right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome back to Torah Studies. This is the beginning of a new book of the Torah, a new series of our Torah Studies program, season number 4, or series 4, and this is book 5 of the Torah, which is the book of Devarim, aka the book of Deuteronomy. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about tonight. So tonight's topic is less about the Torah portion and more about the time of the year that this Torah portion always falls out on. So again, Torah portion is Devarim, and it's always read the Shabbat before the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. So just a quick note about what that means. So tonight is Rosh Chodesh Av, which means it's the first day, the Jewish day starts in the evening, starts at night by nightfall. And so the first day, Rosh Chodesh, of the month of Av, or as we call it, Menachem Av, is tonight. And thus will begin a time period known as the 9 days. And what are the 9 days? There are the 9 days between the 1st of Av and the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av is the day that the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. It's the same day, by certainly divine orchestration, that the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, same exact Hebrew date. It's a day that stands in infamy for the Jewish people. It's the day that the Jewish people were punished for the sin of the spies, to wander for 40 years in the desert, and that happened years before, centuries before the temples were destroyed. It's the day that the Spanish expulsion took place. It's the day that World War I began. Many tragedies, many of the worst tragedies to the Jewish people have happened on this date in Jewish history, on the 9th of Av. It's the saddest day on the calendar. It's a full 24 or 25-hour fast, and it takes place next week. So it takes place, Thursday next week? Does that make sense? Next Thursday. So not this Thursday, next Thursday. Which again places this week's Torah portion, Devarim, which is going to come up this Shabbat, as the Shabbat before the Shabbat leading into the 9th of Av. Just a little bit more about the 9 days. There are various restrictions that are cited in the Code of Jewish Law in the 9 days. Number 1, not to eat meat. Number 2, not to drink wine. Number 3, not to get a haircut. Number 4, I'm just going to stop saying the numbers. I'll just say the things because it's getting annoying for me. No haircuts, no weddings, no wine, no meat, no luxuriating bathing, but for hygiene it's fine. So maybe that spa vacation should be rescheduled, not for the 9 days. What else? What am I missing? No music. No concerts. No whatever. Personal relationships. No, that's fine. Only on the 9th of Av. The issue is that in these 9 days we want to diminish our joy. It's a sad time period in Jewish history, on the Jewish calendar, and therefore we try to diminish our joy by kind of postponing, rescheduling, making sure that these things are not happening in this 9-day period. All right, and it culminates, of course, with the fast of the 9th of Av, which will be next Thursday. This Shabbat has another name. Most Shabbats don't have a special name. It's just Shabbat, and we say Parshat, whatever the Parsha, whatever the Torah portion is. This Shabbat is Shabbat Parshat Devarim and Shabbat Chazon. We call it Shabbat Chazon. What does Chazon mean? Chazon means vision. Why is it called Shabbat Chazon? Well, there's two, as we'll see soon, there are two reasons. There's a classical reason and there's a more modern Hasidic reason. We're going to cite both of them, and then I'm going to ask the question, how do they fit together? And that will be the tension that tonight's class, rides on. How do these two perspectives on the meaning of Shabbat Chazon, how do they work together? And ultimately, what we're going to get to is a perspective on loss, a perspective on pain, a perspective on suffering, a perspective on how to react when life does not go as planned and things seem to go up in smoke. And that's going to be the focus of tonight's class. So let's begin with a quick reading of the opening verses of this week's Haftorah, just to make sure everybody's on the same page here about what a Haftorah is. So every Shabbat in synagogue, the Torah portion is read. we pull out the scroll from the ark, we pull out the Torah scroll, and we read the Torah portion. There are 53 Torah portions. The numerology is Gan, which means garden. 53 Torah portions, pretty much one per week. Sometimes there's double portions, as we've encountered very recently. Last week and previous weeks we had a bunch of double portions, but typically it's one portion per week. And after the Torah portion is read in 7 different mini readings where somebody is called to the Torah, we then read what's called the Haftorah. The Haftorah is a section from the books of the prophets that relates somehow to the Torah reading of the week. This time of year, it relates less to the Torah portion and more to the time of year that we find ourselves in. So this week's Haftorah, meaning we'll read the Torah portion of Devarim, which is what we're up to in this cycle of the Torah. But then for the Haftorah, we're not going to read something that necessarily relates to the Parsha. We're going to read something that relates to the time of year that we find ourselves, which is the Shabbat before the 9th of Av and the temple's destruction. And so what do we read? We read the opening of the book of Isaiah, the book of Yeshayahu Hanavi, the book of Isaiah the prophet, where he speaks about the prophecy regarding the impending destruction of the first temple. He lived in the times of the first holy temple, and one of the main, and he's one, I think he's the most prolific prophet, or at least his book is the most prolific in that it has 66 chapters. It's the longest book amongst the Jewish books of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, and he has many prophecies about the temple's destruction, as well as its rebuilding and the coming of Mashiach, the Messianic era, etc. So let's begin with text number 1. No better time to jump right in than right. Sure.
I think I want to jump in. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
You say that the Haftarah is generally or always related to the Parsha. I don't remember what Devarim is about. I haven't studied this week.
Yeah, it's not about this.
Not about this.
No. In the Code of Jewish Law, it says that that's typically the process, but this time of year, it switches. There's going to be, there's actually a few different, for the 3 weeks, for all 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av.
That's the time it does.
The time it switches. So 3 weeks of impending punishment, doom and gloom, followed by 7 weeks of Haftorahs that are comforting the Jewish people about the destruction. So 3 about the impending loss, including this week's, and then 7 about comfort.
They all have names, like Nachem or whatever?
Yeah, well, that's next. That's the fallen one is Nachem. Yeah. They don't all have names, but the major ones do. The one before and the one after are called Chazon and Nachem. All right, so let's begin. This is Isaiah 1, first 8 verses. David, please take it away.
The vision of Isaiah, son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, king of Judah. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for God has spoken. Children I have raised and exalted, yet they have turned on me. An ox knows its owner, and a donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know. My people does not consider. Woe to a sinful nation, a people heavy with iniquity, evil-doing seed, corrupt children. They forsook God, and they provoked the Holy One of Israel. They pulled back. Why are you beaten when you still rebel? Every head is afflicted with illness, and every heart with malaise. From the sole of the foot until the head, nothing is whole, only wounds, contusions, and lacerated sores. They were not sprinkled with balm, bandaged, or softened with oil. Your land is desolate, your cities burnt with fire. Your land and your presence, strangers devour it, and it is as desolate as one that has been turned over to strangers. And the daughter of Zion shall be left like a hut in the vineyard, like a lodge in a cucumber field, and a city besieged. Had not the God of hosts spared us a remnant, we would soon be like Sodom, and we would resemble Gomorrah.
Thank you. So here, the prophet Isaiah, very important to recognize this. He's speaking, again, the opening chapter of Isaiah, first 9 verses. Sorry, I said 8 before. First 9 verses, and he is speaking of a time where the temple still stands, when Jerusalem still stands. Now, the northern kingdom, the Jewish kingdom had split into two, the northern and southern. The northern kingdom had at this point already been exiled by the Assyrians, but the southern kingdom, including Jerusalem and the temple, was still intact. And yet he's speaking as if it already had happened. Your land, verse 7, your land is desolate, your cities burnt with fire. That had not yet happened. But he was speaking as a vision of what the future is going to look like, and we'll look back and say, how did it happen? And he's saying, I'll tell you how it happened, because y'all need to get back on the right page here so that this doesn't happen. Otherwise, this is going to be the narrative, and of course, this is the actual narrative that happens. This is what happens where, and that last line, had not the God of hosts spared us a remnant, we would be like Sodom and Gomorrah, meaning we would be completely destroyed, but God, spared us to survive in exile, but otherwise, we would be completely lost. Anyway, this is the opening of this week's Haftarah, and if you had to characterize the Haftarah, what would you say? Let's, like when you do return, I don't know, somehow I find myself at Whole Foods doing Amazon returns from time to time. They have the little screen, they ask you, how was your experience? And they have like an upside down, like a frown face, a neutral face, and a smiley face. How would you emoji this opening reading? Is it a smiley face emoji or a sad face emoji? What would you say? A sad face emoji. I'm sorry for asking such softball questions, but it's important to recognize this is a very sad Haftarah. And we read it this Shabbat because we're about to experience, hopefully not, hopefully Mashiach comes and but we're about to experience on the calendar the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, the saddest day of the year, the anniversary of the temple's destruction, when doom and gloom was visited upon our people, and destruction and death and lots of horrific things, not once but twice, and with both temples and with other tragedies. And so that is, if you would ask somebody, why do we read this Haftarah on this Shabbat, that would be the answer. Why is it called Shabbat Chazon? Well, the vision of Isaiah is the English. In the Hebrew, it's Chazon Yeshayahu. Chazon means the vision of, or vision. And so, I know what you're thinking. I should open up an optical store called Chazon Optical. Yeah, I don't know about that. But yeah, it means vision. Chazon means vision. It's the vision of Isaiah. And what is the nature of Isaiah's vision? Death, destruction, doom, and gloom. That's the classical understanding of why this is Shabbat Chazon. And then we have a question. Question is text number 2. This is asked by a somewhat of a modern rabbi from the 19th century. And he asks a very simple question. He says, are you kidding me? Why would you name an entire Shabbat? Shabbat's not supposed to be a sad day. You're naming a Shabbat after something so gloomy? That seems not so cool. All right, let's take a look at text number 2. Eve, if you don't mind, please read text number 2.
This Shabbat is called the Shabbat of Vision because it is the first word of the Haftarah we read on this Shabbat. This is confusing. We understand why next Shabbat's moniker will be taken from the first word of next week's Haftarah. The word is consolation, which will be sorely needed after the 9th of Av. It initiates a 7-week period during which our Haftarot have a motif of comfort. But why do we choose the Haftarah's first word as the moniker for this Shabbat if the passages that follow are a terrible rebuke?
So thank you for reading that. So he asked a simple question. Next week we're going to call it it works in the Hebrew better. Next week we will call it Shabbat Nachamu. Nachamu means comfort. Okay, it makes sense to name a Shabbat in a pleasant way after the wish for consolation and God's comfort. But why in the world would you name the Shabbat Chazon for Isaiah's vision of death and destruction? It seems quite dark. Like, what is that? Comes along Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. He was one of the Hasidic masters, so he is, we would call, third generation Hasidic movement. The Hasidic movement was begun by the Baal Shem Tov, whose primary student was the Maggid of Mizrich, who had many students who became Hasidic masters and mystics and leaders and Rebbes in their own right, including the Alter Rebbe, who is the founder of Chabad, and also including Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. He was a Hasidic master, an incredible rabbi. Many stories have been told about him, but he has a different perspective on why this Shabbat is called Shabbat Chazon. Joel, thank you. Please, I know your name, but thank you. Please read text number 3.
That's okay, Bob. No problem. In a book of Hasidic insights about the festival of Rosh Hashanah from Rabbi Parish, I found something about the Shabbat of Vision, Shabbat Chazon. This is what it said. I heard the following from my father, my teacher of blessed memory, in the name of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, whose soul has ascended above. He shared this parable during his visit to the Brahmin community for the Shabbat of Vision. A father sewed an expensive garment for his precious son to wear. The boy was careless with the garment, treating it inappropriately. It was eventually ruined, and the father tore it to pieces. The father gave him a second garment, which the child also disrespected and destroyed, so that the father tore that garment as well. What did the father do? He sewed a third garment, but did not give it to the son to wear. Instead, he concealed it. On rare occasions, he showed it to his son and said, "If you behave properly, you'll be permitted to wear this garment." This incentivizes the child to improve his behavior until it becomes his nature. Then the father will give him the garment without fear that the child might revert to his old ways, since good behavior has become almost his nature. This is the meaning of Shabbat of Vision, Shabbos Nachamu. Every Jew is shown a distinct glimpse into the future temple.
All right, Shabbat, you said Shabbat Nachamu, Shabbat Chazon. It's called Shabbat Chazon. Why? Says the Berditchever, the Rabbi of Berditchev, every Jew is shown a distant glimpse of the future temple. That is an incredible idea. Here we have the Hasidic understanding. It's not called Shabbat Chazon simply because that's the opening word of the Haftorah, although it is the opening word of the Haftorah. But it's also, or maybe primarily, but we're going to have to figure out how this reconciles, called Shabbat Chazon, which means Shabbat of vision, not because of Isaiah's vision, but because of your vision, and your vision, and your vision, your vision, and my vision, and your vision. And what is the vision? The vision is of the third temple. What does it mean of the third temple? So he gives a parable. You buy your kid a suit, and he runs around with it in the playground and rips the knee, and you say, you can't use it. You buy him a second suit. He rips that one over. It's destroyed. You buy him a third suit. Fool me once, fool me twice, not a third time. We're going to keep it in the closet until you learn how to take care of a suit, and then you'll get a suit. But now you might forget about the suit. So we say to the kid, once in a while, we'll show you, this could be yours, if the price is right. Sorry, Bob Barker, I stole your line. Right? This can be yours. He had such a skinny microphone. I always wondered, what is that? No one else had that. Anyway, these are the things that go through my head. Anyway, whatever. Showcase Showdown. I love that show. Plinko was my favorite, where they put the disc and went. Anyway, look it up. You'll see what I'm talking about.
We're concerned about you. It's okay.
It's okay. You don't be so concerned. So, why is it called Shabbat Chazon? Because God says, okay, back to the Father. The Father says to the Son, I have a third suit. And from time to time, I'll show it to you to incentivize you or to encourage you to shape up so that you can get the suit. And that's what God does every Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision. It's not about Isaiah's vision about destruction. It's about our vision on this Shabbat of the third temple. Now you might be thinking, where do we get to see it? So here's what I need to say. You may not see it with your open eyes, but your soul, your neshama sees it. And you're inspired. Every one of us is inspired in the Shabbat with a spiritual vision of what that future time looks like. A better world, a peaceful world, a temple, Jews all together again, etc. And that should inspire us to then get our act together to be deserving of said future time. Does that make sense? Now that is a happy face. That's a smiley face. If we had a vote, right, the temperature of that insight, that's more of the smiley face one. Which begs the question, how do we reconcile these two perspectives? I mean, it's nice to say it's either or maybe it could be both, but how do they really work together? I mean, the classical understanding of Shabbat Chazon is the vision of Isaiah. It's the Haftorah, which is about destruction. The Berditchever, 250 years ago, comes along and says, I have another insight, and the other insight, 200 years ago, says, I have another insight. It's the Shabbat vision of the third temple, which is a positive thing and an encouraging thing and a constructive thing, and it's about rebuilding as opposed to destruction, and the question thus becomes, which one is it? I mean, you want to tell me there's two interpretations that are kind of, parallel, that's one thing. Even complementary is another thing, but you tell me two interpretations of the same concept that are min hakatza el hakatza, that's the Hebrew for, one pole to the other pole, from one extreme to the other, that becomes a little bit disorienting. How do we put the two insights together? Now you might say, who says maybe they don't have to be together, maybe we just, suspend our whatever belief or disbelief, whatever the right expression is, suspension of disbelief, and we say, okay, whatever, when we're with one, we have one, when we're with the other, they don't have to, never the twain shall meet. They're not going to meet together. Either it's destruction or it's rebuilding, but whatever. But tonight we're going to bridge the gap between these two. But to do that, we need to ask another question. And that question is the following. This is going to be a big question. It's predicated on a concept in Judaism, a truth in Judaism that tells us that God gives us His own mitzvot. It's a little hard to understand without anthropomorphizing God, but our sages tell us in multiple places. Magid, there's a verse that says, Magid devarav liYaakov, chukav umishpatav liYisrael. He tells over, Magid, he tells over his words to Jacob and his ordinances, his chukim, his decrees, and his mishpatim and his, his rules, his laws to Israel. Which means that he gives us his own laws. You see the nuance there? It's not that he gives us laws to live by, but he gives us laws that reflect his own values, God's own values. Which is why our sages tell us that if God gives us a mitzvah, on some level, He's also observing that mitzvah. We put on tefillin, it says, God puts on tefillin. In our tefillin, it says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, God is one. In His tefillin, the Medrash says, in His tefillin, it's not even Kabbalah, it's straight up Medrash. In His tefillin, what does it say in God's tefillin? The Medrash asks, this is Medrash Tillim, the Medrash on Tillim, on Psalms. It says, it says, Umi ke'amcha ki Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz. Who is like my nation Israel, one nation upon earth. So we talk about God's oneness, and what does God's tefillin talk about? Our oneness, our uniqueness. We talk about how God is unique, and God's tefillin, our tefillin mentions God's uniqueness. God's tefillin mentions out. Now, I'm not suggesting that God has huge black boxes with leather straps and is putting it on a huge God arm that does not exactly work because we believe that God does not have a body, or we don't believe that God has any physical form. So what does it mean that God puts on tefillin? The short answer is, I have no idea. But the longer answer is, in a conceptual way, in a spiritual way, we celebrate this, God celebrates that. The point is that God would not violate, we believe, it's a core belief, a Jewish belief, that God would not violate His own prohibitions. If He gives us a prohibition, He would not violate it. Because it's a mitzvah, it's certainly a value that He shares. Which leads to the following question. And I'm going to build it up with two different prohibitions that we have. How was God allowed to destroy the temple? That's going to be the question. Okay? Pretend I didn't ask yet, and then we'll build up to the question. The question's going to be, based on Jewish law, based on halacha, based on God's own mitzvot that He should personally also be bound by, how could God have destroyed His temple? Why is that a problem? Two reasons, two mitzvot that seem to fly in the face of that permissibility. Number one, there is a prohibition in Torah called Baal Tashchit. Who's familiar with that? Baal Tashchit. What does Baal Tashchit mean?
Don't waste. Don't be wasteful.
Not to be wasteful. Good. So when we were kids and we'd be throwing out stuff or taking a piece of paper or ripping it up, Baal Tashchit.
Another meeting?
Huh?
Is another meeting?
No, it means no.
Oh,
No.
that's what it is. Okay.
Well, I would tweak the language. So you said don't be wasteful. I would say don't be destructive. Meaning don't destroy, if something has a utility.
Don't destroy it unnecessarily.
Unnecessarily. You're not allowed to destroy it unnecessarily. If something has a utility, if there's, like the Rebbe was famous for, somebody wrote a letter to him, he would always just like circle. If somebody asked an either or, like, should I do this, should I do that? He would just circle the one that he was advising. Like, to be a little bit minimalistic, not wasting any paper. He would use all the paper in the envelope to write the note on, whatever it was. The point is to be,
Respectful of lifestyle.
to conserve resources.
Yeah.
Now, the famous example, the source of this in Torah, which I think everybody is familiar with, is the prohibition about cutting down trees, fruit-bearing trees. The Torah says when you're waging war and besieging a city, great or not great, I don't know, whatever, depends on how you're feeling about that war, whatever it is. But one thing you're not allowed to do is cut down the fruit-bearing trees in the act of, in that commission of war. Why? Because you can cut down the not fruit-bearing trees, and therefore, why are you cutting down the fruit-bearing trees? That is considered to be not only wasteful, but destructive for no purpose. Now, if you're telling me the only way to save your life is with a fruit-bearing tree, fine. But otherwise, if there's no reason for it, if you could use something else that's less wasteful, don't use the more wasteful thing. Let's see how this is codified in the Code of Jewish Law. This is Maimonides' Rambam in his Mishnah Torah, Laws of Kings and Wars, which sounds like an appropriate place to talk about this prohibition, which stems in Torah in that very context. Toba, please read text 4.
We may not cut down fruit trees outside a city, nor prevent an irrigation ditch from bringing water to the trees, so that they dry up, as the Torah states. Do not destroy its trees. Anyone who cuts down such a tree should be lashed. This does not apply only in a siege, but in all situations. This is not just true of trees. Anyone who breaks utensils, tears garments, destroys buildings, stops up a spring, or ruins food with destructive intent is in violation of the provision of do not destroy.
In case you're wondering if Jewish law is about protecting resources and the environment, etc., no need to look further than this to have a resounding answer, and that answer is yes. Torah is very much about protecting God's world, about ensuring the ensuring the viability of natural resources. So if you have a utensil, don't break it. If you have a garment, don't tear it. If you have a building, don't destroy it. If you have a spring, don't stop it up. If you have food, don't ruin it.
Yet we're told to tear kriya.
So that's not with a destructive intent. That's a constructive intent. It's to somehow get the grief out and manifest. The key word there, it's a great question. The key word there is destructive intent. If you have derech, in the Hebrew it's derech hashchata or derech hashchasa, which means in the act of destruction, you're not allowed to do that. Which will...
Is that the key to the whole thing? I mean, in other words, if I throw out something that could be used otherwise,
that's a problem.
If you carelessly, it's one thing. If I do it destructively, it's
no. Carelessly, you should be more careful. The difference is, if something is no longer edible, then you can throw it out. If something is, then you should try to find a use for it. The point is that we're not supposed to waste resources or destroy things that have value or utility.
The origin of sustainability.
It's about sustainability, straight up sustainability. Now, that's one issue. So based on this, we're going to ask a question. And that question is, if you're not supposed to destroy things, God tells us, don't destroy. And that means it's not like do as I say and not as I do. We believe that God abides by his own mitzvot. In which case, God also abides by that principle of not destroying things. In which case, we might ask the question, then how could God destroy the temple on the 9th of Av? What kind of business is this? You told us not to destroy, and you're destroying a building? What's up with that? Let's ask a second question. We're going to address these one at a time, but that's one question. It's a question on God. A little bit bold to ask the question, especially when it was raining and lightning before. Kidding, right? So the question is, how could God have destroyed his own holy temple? So you tell me, well, it's his temple. Halacha doesn't care whose garment it is. It's your garment. You pay for it. You still can't destroy it wantonly.
He gave the Romans free will and they did it.
Yeah, but he allowed it to happen. He allowed it to happen. It's basically...
He also allowed the Holocaust to happen.
Well, it's okay. So hold on. One thing at a time. We're not gonna be... Yes. Okay. One thing at a time. Hold on. Let's address what we know, what we have discussed, and then we can see how to apply it or not apply it. That'll be our kind of homework. So that's one question. Second question is, even if you tell me that there might be some sort of exception? Well, you might say, what might we say? We might say that there's maybe a reason why he could destroy, but there's another prohibition, and this is specifically about destroying any item of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Take a look at this next text. I'm going to do the readings now. Take a look at text number 5, once again from Maimonides. This time, Mishnah Torah Laws of the Temple, chapter 1, halacha 17. Look what he writes. One who demolishes a single stone from the altar, that's the temple's altar, any part of the temple building, or the floor of the temple courtyard between the entrance hall and the altar in a destructive manner, should be lashed, as the Torah states, and you must destroy their altars, that means the idolatrous altars, but do not do so to God your God, meaning God says the foreign worship idol altars and temples you can destroy, but not my temple. And so God says, don't touch not even a single stone from his temple. And what did God do? Destroyed the whole thing. That seems highly inconsistent. And so at this point in the class, we asked the opening question about chazon, two perspectives, and how do they work together. But now we've pivoted to ask a completely different type of question, and that is, how could God, halachically, like literally, legally, how was God allowed to destroy his temple? Number one, it violates Bal Tashchit, the prohibition against destruction, destroying things that have utility. Number two, it violates the specific prohibition about destroying anything related to or part of the structure of the temple building, and destroying the whole temple certainly would run afoul of that. And thus we ask to God, how God were you allowed to do this? With me so far? All right, now let's take a look at text number.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
The scene. I can't jump ahead, right? I can't jump ahead to where I think we're going, right?
You can do whatever you want.
Really?
I may shut you down though. No, I'm kidding.
You can, please do. And it doesn't fit. But is the purpose of destroying the temple the same reason why in the story with the garments is that there's a constructive purpose to have the Jews look forward?
Hold that thought.
Okay,
Let's
great.
keep on going.
And then one other thing.
Yes.
Isaiah is talking about this vision of you guys keep on messing up, and look what you're going to do if, this is what's going to happen because you guys keep on messing up. What's going on around the time of Isaiah and before that? Are we messing up all the time before that? Is that
A lot of idolatry.
a pattern that's
Yes.
going on?
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of idolatry in the times of Isaiah. Let's take a look at text number 6. Isaiah, just for the record, was murdered by his own grandson, King Menashe, who was an idolatrous Jewish king,
Wow.
who killed had his own grandfather put to death. Very, very troubling story. Isaiah also lived for 120 years, and Isaiah was like in that way he kind of mirrored Moses. Okay, text number 6. I think he was also a prophet for like 80 years, kind of like Moses. I think there are a bunch of things lined up with that. Text number 6, Rabbi Chaim Pelagi, okay, says the following. All right, let me share this. Here we go. Text numeral 6. How could God burn down the temple and even dispatch flames from the heavens? Halacha states that we may not demolish even one stone from the altar on pain of lashes. Our sages have intimated on many occasions that God observes his own commandments. If so, we ask how God justified the destruction of the temple. And that's the question that I just asked. Not my question. It's a question this author lived in the 1700s and 1800s. It's an old question, and we're going to address it now. So to address the first issue, which is the Bal Tashchit prohibition, which is generally not to destroy things, we can answer, well, we already gave the caveat before. We already gave the kernel to the answer. The issue of destroying something is only when you're destroying it in a wanton fashion. But if there's a reason for the destruction, like it soothes your anger or your sadness, like the example of Kriya tearing the garment upon losing a loved one, God forbid, that is not considered to be wanton destruction, meaning purposeless destruction. Rather, it has a purpose, it has a utility. And what is the utility? The utility is to kind of soothe the sadness, to soothe it and to get it, it's cathartic, it's healing. In a similar way, we might say, God destroying the temple was soothing. How so? As we're about to read in a fascinating midrash, text 7 will establish the halachic point that I just made. Text 8 will share a midrash, as the midrash will soon tell us. God destroyed the building instead of the people. God destroyed the temple instead of the Jewish people. And because that got out he was angry at the people, but he took it out on the stones of the temple. And thus it wasn't purposeless, it wasn't wanton, it was actually cathartic and spared the Jewish people. Therefore, it's not considered to be purposeless destruction. Does that make sense? We're going to read this inside. All right.
But we do have to get back to the Shoah.
We will.
That was people he destroyed.
Okay. Text 7. Text 7, here we go. Here's the halachic piece of this from the Code of Jewish Law. One who destroys anything from which others can benefit violates, do not destroy his trees. This is only if one destroys for the purposes of destruction and ruination. However, if one destroys an impediment to protect what it harms, it is permissible if this is the only way to do it. For example, destroying a tree that is damaging the soil or other trees that are better than it. If one destroys something for personal benefit, for example, if one has no kindling and uses a chair or a table to build a fire to warm oneself, it is certainly permissible, because it's not considered destruction, it's considered to have a constructive utility. Text number 8, this is the midrash that shares this idea regarding the temple's destruction. God vented his fury, he poured out his inflamed wrath, he ignited a fire in Zion. That is from Lamentations, written by the prophet Jeremiah. It is written, a song of Asaph, God, nations have invaded your inheritance, from Psalms. This psalm should have been called a weeping of Asaph, a wailing of Asaph, a lamentation of Asaph. Why is it called Mizmar la-Asaph? Why is it called a song of Asaph? It is analogous to a king who prepared a wedding house for his son, plastered it, carved wall sculptures in it, and made drawings in it. He basically built a beautiful home for his son. But his son went astray, and the king immediately ascended to the wedding house, ripped the curtains, and broke the poles. The son's mentor took a reed flute and began playing. They said to him, the king overturned his son's wedding house, and you're sitting and playing. What's with the joy? He said, I am playing because he overturned his son's wedding canopy and did not vent his rage on his son. So too they said to Asaph, God destroyed the sanctuary and the temple, and you're sitting and singing. He said, I am singing because God vented his wrath on the wood and stones and did not vent his wrath on Israel, on the people. That is what is written. He ignited a fire in Zion, a euphemism for the temple, and it consumed her foundations. And that is the song, meaning it's the fact that God took it out on the building and not on the people, in which case God destroying the building was cathartic, God destroying the building was soothing, God destroying the building was protecting the people in the case of the temple's destruction. And thus we might say that to our first question, how could God destroy the temple when you're not allowed to destroy for no reason? We can say it wasn't for no reason. It wasn't for no reason. It had a utility, it had a purpose. But our second question still remains. Our second question is, this is not about, in general, not destroying something that has utility. There's a specific prohibition in the Torah. This was our second question. The Torah says you're not allowed to destroy or remove even a single stone from the altar, let alone all of the stones of the entire temple. So how could God do this? You tell me, well, at least he took it out on the stones and not on the people. Sure, but there's still a prohibition specifically about touching the stones. How could God touch the stones? So for this, we have a second answer. And this is going to be huge. Text number 9, and this pertains to tzugazon, the times we find ourselves in and the location we find ourselves in. My friends, before we read it inside, let's just talk about it outside for a second. What we're about to say is something so intuitive and so logical, we're all going to say, of course, until we said it. It wasn't, but now once we hear it, it'll be like, obviously. When are you prohibited to move or destroy or remove any stone from the altar of the temple? That's only if it's in the act of destruction. But when are you allowed to? If it's in the context of remodeling. So to give an example, the same prohibition that applies to the temple applies in the Code of Jewish Law to any synagogue. You cannot just destroy a synagogue for no reason. You can't. It's very to be very careful what happens to the synagogue building. So a lot of laws in the Code of Jewish Law about how to deal with that. Let's say the Jewish community no longer lives in a neighborhood. What can you do with the building? There's laws and restrictions on that. I'm not saying it's followed in every case throughout history, but there are certain restrictions on what can be done with it. But to return to this point, as I've mentioned, we're planning on expanding this very space. This is a daily sanctuary. We're going to make it into not only a sanctuary space, but a revamped Torah Center space, and the home like a base medrash, a beautiful, beautiful space. 1,600 square foot space, learning and light, and it's going to be completely reimagined. Couches and coffee stations, and it's going to be beautiful. Here's the question. How do you move a wall? You can't touch it. You can't touch a wall. You can't knock down a wall. How do you... The answer is, you're not destroying it. You're remodeling it. In the context of remodeling, of course you're going to take down a wall, but you're not destroying it. I have been at the dentist's office, at the oil change place on more than one occasion. And for some reason, the television in the lobby seems to always be on the channel HGTV, the home remodeling situation channel. And I know Chip and Joanna. Do I know the Gaines is absolutely Chip and Joanna. And it's demo day, and he puts on the glasses, and he's got the sledgehammer, and he's hockeying, and he's clapping, and this and that. That's the question. What are you doing? You're destroying it. He said, destroying? Bro, it's not destruction. We're going to build something beautiful. Take it easy. Do you understand what's happening here? The only halachic, the only legal justification for God to destroy the temple is only if what? It's not destruction, but it's remodeling. This is such a bold take. It's going to completely reframe our entire perspective on what the 9th of Av is. It's not a day of destruction. It's a day of remodeling. And the first step to remodeling is demo. Well, you want a new kitchen? You have to take down something. You can't keep the old thing and get the new thing. It doesn't work like that. You want a new kitchen? Great. You got to knock everything down. You got to pull out the old stuff. Does it look messy? Sure. But it also changed the perspective on how much we're crying over what we lost. Right? I mean, we might have gotten used to those, that 1950s pale green linoleum situation.
Green shag.
Yeah? Am I getting somewhere with, I don't even know if, right? Something like that, something or other. Picture your own situation, right? The old school, whatever. You might have been attached to it. You might shed a tear. But you know what? There's a trajectory, and we're headed to a better place. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at some of these texts. Such a beautiful insight, and this is all the Rebbe's imagination about this whole framing. Mordechai, he was a halachic, he was a rishon, one of the early Talmudic commentaries on halachis from the 1200s. He says, text 9 about a shul, about a synagogue, it is forbidden to destroy a synagogue. However, if one destroys it for the express purpose of rebuilding it, it is permissible. This is because demolition of this type is a form of building. We call it remodeling. Yeah, okay, listen, if you have an existing... hold on 1 second. I have it on good authority that that we will take down, did not always look like this. I have it on good authority that there used to be a house on this prairie. Kidding. A little house on this property, right? Which they used to pray in, used to daven in. Does anybody remember that? I certainly don't. Yeah? You remember this? And they knocked it down. And I ask you today, how can you knock it down? You can't destroy a synagogue. Even if it's in a home, you can't destroy a synagogue. How dare you? The answer is, take it easy. Play the long game. It's not even that long. I guess in some contexts it's long. Play the long game. It's not about destruction. It's about rebuilding. To rebuild, you need to knock down the old edifice to build it bigger. That is what the Mordechai says. That is halachically sound. Let's bring it back to our story. Let's take a look at text number 10. This from the Zohar. Zohar is fascinating. Take a look at this. When Israel left Egypt, this is going to explain why God needs to destroy Temple 1 and 2 in order to have Temple 3. You might be wondering, what was wrong with the first two? I understand to knock something down that's inferior to build something better than it. But why would you knock down the first two temples? They seemed fine. They weren't. Let's take a look. When Israel left Egypt, God desired to install them in the land like celestial angels and to build for them a holy house, to bring it down from heaven and to plant the Jewish people in the earth as a sacred seedling, just like their ideal heavenly form. As it says, you will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, in which place, the passage continues, the place you made to dwell in, O God. This means in the place that you, God, created and in no other. You effected a dwelling for your presence, refers to the first temple. A temple, O God, your hands established, refers to the second temple, and both were intended to be the product of God's hands. In other words, to pause here for a moment, initially the intention was that God would build the temple. But when Israel angered God in the desert, on the 9th of Av, ironically, they died. God brought their children into the land, and the temple was built, not by God directly, but rather by human hands. Therefore, it did not last. The simple reason is because anything that a human being builds, like if you are temporal, anything you make will also be temporal. It can't have something you don't. How could you impart within it eternality if you don't possess eternality? The temple was doomed for temporality the moment it was built by human hands. Let's continue. Therefore, it did not last. King Solomon knew that the work of mortals cannot last. Thus he said, unless God builds the house, its builders toil in vain. Psalms 127. Because it will not last. In the days of Ezra, when they built the second temple, they sinned again, and that did not last either, built by human hands. Thus, until today, God's original home has not yet entered the world, meaning the home built by God himself. Regarding the future, it's written, God builds Jerusalem, he will build it in no other. And thus we might say, the reason why the first temple and the second temple had to go is to clear space for a temple that's not built by human hands, but rather a temple built by God himself. Let's continue. You know what this means? This means something powerful. The moment the first temple was destroyed, it was destroyed to build a second temple. But the second temple also, and it was a larger edifice. It was an improvement. It was larger, and it lasted 10 years longer. 410 was the first, 410 years the first temple stood. 420 years the second temple stood. 10 years longer, and it was a larger, physically larger edifice. So it was an upgrade. So you destroy one to build something bigger, and you destroy the second one. God destroyed the second one to build the third. Bigger, better,
Eternal.
and eternal. Mainly, that's the main distinction. Eternal, built by God. Maybe designed in Cupertino, but built by God. Right? Now, stay with me for a second. This is very important. What that means, and the upshot of this is crazy. It means from the moment the temple was destroyed, the second temple, we might reframe it, not as destruction, but in this context, rather as demo day. First step to construction, which means that we are in a continuum. We are in a moment of building. Take a look at how the Rebbe frames this. This is text number 11. It all starts now. This provides a fascinating insight into the destruction of the first and second temples. God began to build the third temple as soon as the second temple was destroyed. He is not waiting for Mashiach to come before starting to build the new temple. He began to rebuild as soon as the earlier temple was destroyed. Moreover, the only reason God destroyed the temple was to fulfill his desire for an improved God-made eternal temple instead of a human-made temporal temple. This means that the destruction of the first two temples was for the sole purpose of building a better temple, the third temple which God will build. It follows that what occurred to the first two temples was not destruction. Instead, it was the first phase of the bigger and better rebuilding project. This explains a fascinating story of the Talmud. This is text 12. There was an incident involving someone plowing his field. One of his oxen mooed. An Arab passed near him and asked, "What are you?" He replied, "I'm a Jew." The Arab said, "Unharness your ox and untie your plow." "Why?" asked the Jew. "Because the temple of the Jews was just destroyed." "How do you know?" "I know it from your ox's mooing." While they were conversing, the cow mooed again. The Arab said, "Harness your ox, tie your plow. The Redeemer of the Jews was just born." What does that mean? It means that in the very moment that the temple was destroyed, Mashiach also, the seed was also planted. Meaning destroyed means you're now clearing the ground for the third temple, for the rebuilding. So you can look at it as destruction or you can look at it as construction. At this point, it's a choice. It's a choice that we make. This explains how both meanings of Shabbat Chazon can work together. We said before, Shabbat Chazon is Isaiah's vision of destruction, and yet Shabbat Chazon is the vision of the third suit, hanging in the closet, the third temple. The Berditchever said it's a vision for the future of a positive time. How could they both be true? It's either sad or it's happy. But now we understand that the destruction and the sadness is only one framing of it, but the very destruction itself could be seen in a constructive, through a constructive lens as paving the way for the rebuilding. Page 40, this is the final text. This gives us a sweet perspective of the Shabbat's moniker, Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision. On the surface, this name refers to Isaiah's vision about Judea and Jerusalem that we chant in the Haftarah this week, an unhappy Haftarah about the punishment of the Jewish people. On the other hand, there is a well-known tradition related by Rabbi Hillel Parich in the name of the rabbi from Berditchev that a vision of this future temple is shown to every Jew on this Shabbat of vision. Based on everything we learned, we understand that these are not opposing visions but related. Moreover, they are a single continuum. We see the temple of the future inside the destruction of the previous temple. We see it even in the most devastating aspects of this destruction that are remembered on the Shabbat before the 9th of Av, the anniversary of the temple's destruction. This encourages the Jew not to be shaken by the difficulties and darkness of exile, and as a result, his spiritual service in exile is enhanced. And my friends, I want to bring this home. We have to conclude because of the service here, the evening service starting in about 90 seconds or maybe about 2 minutes. I want to conclude with the following takeaway. Have you ever experienced in your life something that seemed in the moment devastating, or something that seemed to be a loss, painful, something broke, something lost, you lost a job, you lost a relationship, you lost something. But it turns out that loss was actually precipitating a greater gain. You know the expression, when one door closes, another opens. It's so true in our lives. And I think this Shabbat Chazon, and this insight of the Rebbe that views Tisha B'Av not only as a day of destruction, but a day of demo day to begin the construction. It's a complete paradigm shift. And by the way, if you internalize this, you're not crying less on Tisha B'Av, but you're also being driven inside by a sense of positivity and hope for the future. And I ask you this question. If in the moment of loss, you can think in that moment somehow, or maybe the moment after, if you can imagine in your own mind's eye that God is running the world, and therefore I can see, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but there will be an opportunity born of this very destruction. That this seed planted in the ground that disintegrates is not for the sake of disintegration, but rather for the sake of growth. That this loss of whatever it is will in some way lead to something else, another relationship, another job, inner strength that's going to come out that I never knew I had, whatever it is. But this could lead to a breakthrough of incredible proportions if we can wrap our heads around that. I asked you today, would we not perhaps navigate that in a healthier, more positive situation, in a positive context? And I would answer my own question. It's very convenient that I ask the questions and answer the questions and this evening. But I will answer that question by saying, yes, it is. Now, it doesn't make it easier. It won't answer all the questions. It won't explain why bad things happen. It won't explain the Shoah, the Holocaust. It's not going to explain personal, and I would never use it to explain death and loss, etc. But a temple's destruction, the Rebbe says we can apply it to a building. Well, I'm not going to apply it to people. I'm not going to say, well, this person died. Whoa, look at the bright side. We're not going to say that. That's I think beyond what the Rebbe modeled for us. But what he did talk about was a building. And for the last 2,000 years, we've been crying and mourning, and it seemed completely devastating. And the Rebbe opens up a little bit of a window and says, how about this? The only way God was allowed to do it is if it's constructive. So maybe let's focus on that, and let's focus on the future. It's an amazing perspective. It doesn't mean we don't grieve. It doesn't mean we don't take the time to grieve. But it also means that even in the same, we can hold space for two things. You know, today we can do the hard things. We can hold space for both things: the sorrow and the hope. And with this, we can navigate the difficult things in our lives. May we never have difficult things. Whatever difficulty we do experience, we shouldn't. But if we do, it should be coupled with the breakthrough that follows, and which is typically assisted by our perspective. That indeed there is some sort of breakthrough to be had. Thank you for joining me tonight. Again, sorry for wrapping it up, but we have services starting minus 60 seconds ago. So wish everybody a good rest of the week and an early Shabbat Shalom. We usually do that from Wednesday on. And may this Shabbat Chazon indeed be the Shabbat in which we do see the vision, and may that vision manifest as reality next week, even before next week, with the coming of Mashiach. Speak it in our days, and let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Wow, cool.
All right. Thank you. All right. Services. So we're formally concluded, and we'll open up this thing. Hey, but I will stick around for any questions or comments if there are any.
This dichotomy. I guess it's possible to hold both at the same time. Dichotomies are hard for people.
The Rebbe was not suggesting that Tisha B'Av become a party.
Right, yeah.
Woohoo! We have the land. It's right. The land is clear. We can build now. It's not about
optimism.
right. But it's about
Duality.
It's the story. We ready to start?
Are you finished?
Are we finished?
Your call is finished?
Oh, yeah. Send the women. It's the story of Rabbi Akiva, who's walking the Temple Mount after the temple's destruction, and he sees a fox. And everyone, hey, and everyone's crying, and he's laughing. And they say, why are you crying? Why are you laughing? We're crying because the temple's destroyed. Why are you laughing? Because if the temple is destroyed like this, can you imagine what it's going to be like when it gets rebuilt? There's a prophecy that says it's going to be.
I don't understand the fox. I forgot.
There's a
I
fox
heard
roaming on the grounds where the temple,
that lets you
where the
know-
temple.
that lets you know that
There's a prophecy that says that the temple is going to be razed to the ground, and another prophecy that says that once again, one day it will be rebuilt. And he said, until I saw it razed to the ground, that prophecy be fulfilled. I didn't know that it could be.
that's what the Fox Wandering Through represented.
Yes.
that it was
Rabbi Kiva was able to see the rebuilding and the construction. Okay, they just started the service. Sorry, I got to run. See you guys. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, and we'll see you soon. Okay. Bye, guys.
I'm gonna send you Ruth this information in email, okay?